Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Brian Zimmerman with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenter. Mickey Patterson has led multidisciplinary teams in over 35 hospitals focused on improving orthopedic and surgical care through national benchmarking, evidence-based practices, and workflow redesign to measurably improve healthcare outcomes for a wide profile of client hospitals, operating rooms, and orthopedic service lines. Dr. Patterson is a certified orthopedic nurse practitioner and brings over 25 years of clinical experience in healthcare consulting, direct advanced orthopedic patient care, university-level teaching, quantitative and qualitative NIH research. She has over 30 peer-reviewed publications, including 3 chapters in Nursing Text, 6 research articles. She is a past president of the National Association of Orthopedic Nurses and was recently awarded the Outstanding Contribution to Orthopedic Nursing. Dr. Patterson has delivered hundreds of presentations and review courses and continues to speak nationally and internationally. Dr. Patterson was a part of the National Association of Orthopedic Nurses Research Task Force on Safe Patient Handling and Movement, working with the Veterans Administration, TAMPA, NIOSH, ANA, and ergonomic specialists to delineate high risk for injury tasks and develop algorithms for staff and patient safety. Dr. Patterson, I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Thanks so much, Brian. I want to talk today about OR injuries and how we can mitigate both the physical and the financial pain, and probably some emotional pain too. I just want to tell you I'm very passionate about it. I've been working with safe patient handling for many years. This group picture you see is actually our original task force, probably some 10 years ago now, that worked on getting some algorithms, finding out what the high-risk tasks were for orthopedic nursing. This was also done by these same people. So you see here Audrey Nelson, who is the front runner, and she comes from the safety center at the VA hospital in Tampa, Florida, along with Mary Matz, Andrea Baptiste, and John Lloyd. From NIOSH, we have Tom Waters, Stephanie Radowitz from Diligent, Patty Meekum from Gulman, Nancy Hughes from ANA, and there's myself, Carol Sedlak, Peggy Donnie, Cynthia Gonzalez, and we have formed a task force and led it through from the beginning of trying to find out what the injuries were to how is it best to take care of patients safely. The same thing is done with the operating room nurses, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And this is the disclosure. I'm actually a paid consultant. In the executive summary, this is just to tell you what I'm going to tell you. We're going to talk about the high-risk tasks that are happening in the operating room and learn some about the best practices available. We're going to understand some of the current regulations and legislation that's going on that's kind of pushing the adoption of patient lift technology. We're also going to talk about costs associated with the OR injuries, looking to get a return on investment and utilizing safe patient handling technology. So we know this is a growing problem. As we get older, as our patients get heavier, as we get heavier, we're going to have to do more with less. When we talk about the physical pain, the American Nurses Association did a survey in 2011, and they asked the nurses, what are your top 3 health concerns? And as you can see, overwork and stress is number 1. Number 2 is worry about a disabling musculoskeletal injury. And this speaks volumes. That's even higher than worrying about contacting an infectious disease like AIDS or Ebola. So it is a real crisis, and nurses and healthcare people are really worried about it. We also know that there was a hearing for the legislator legislature when they were trying to pass the Healthcare Worker Protection Act in 2013. The dialogue that was presented to them with statistics from the American Nurses Association, NEOSH, and others talked about 52% of the nurses complaining of chronic back pain. 38% of the nurses had pain severe enough to actually leave work. But one of the key findings that was presented to this hearing was that patients are not safe when they're being lifted, transferred, or repositioned manually. The American Nurses Association also talked about 12% of career nurses leaving due to back pain, and that in a year, 8 out of 10 nurses work in pain. So these are really strong findings. There's a big problem. And we also have an aging workforce. Did you know 37% of surgeons are over 55 years of age? The average age of a nurse is 50 years old. Of course, it seems to go up every year whenever I have my birthday. And the average age of an OR nurse is actually 53. And you might find it surprising, but it takes longer to become an operating room nurse than to work as a regular nurse on an inpatient unit or rehab or any other situation. And these older staff members, surgeons, nurses, techs, aides, have been exposed to repetitive stress and injury over all their years of practice. So let's talk a little bit about the financial pain. There are direct costs, and per hunter, and these are some of the figures that I found, was it cost about $27,000 to $83,000 per staff claim. Patients' injuries can cost $27,000 to well over $1 million, and you've seen that. But then there's the indirect costs, and these are said to be 3 times as high. When I talk about indirect costs, you need to understand that this is a complex system. So not only did you lose the nurse or the staff member in the operating room, it increases the stress and workload to the remaining staff. You need to get a replacement staff member. So if someone goes out with a back injury, they're usually gone for about 12 weeks. There is an OR personnel shortage right now as we speak. There is a huge influx of travel nurses that do OR specifically. But when you lose that highly skilled staff member that has experience with that surgeon and that surgery and those instruments and the process that it takes to get that surgery complete, you are going to have longer case times. You'll have a reduction in margins. Also, indirectly, your workers' compensation rates will increase. And one of the things that I'm going to say here, it's an indirect cost, but you can probably put some numbers to it, is the fear of re-injury. When a staff member gets injured in the operating room, when they hear the overhead page 4 for lifting help in room 6, they are going to hesitate to respond because they don't want to get re-injured. That also increases the time that the patient's spending in an operating room, delaying cases, which cascades through your entire day. And that fear of re-injury actually will have a price tag. And imagine if a surgeon is hurt. The revenue is going to be exponential. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about regulations and legislation. You know, there was a National Healthcare Workers Protection Act, and they have now raised it in 2016. This is the 3rd time that this bill has been introduced in Congress. There are so many national groups supporting it. And through the years of this bill being introduced and addressed, they have now, the Department of Labor is actually able to do unscheduled visits to be sure that healthcare workers are safe. However, They really don't have enough staffing. It's not strong enough for that to be effective. Because the federal government isn't able to make an effective healthcare worker protection law, many states have taken it on themselves. There are 11 states with worker protection. And this is healthcare worker protection. So if you understand that a healthcare worker has more risk than, say, somebody building an engine for a car manufacturer. Car manufacturers are not allowed to let their workers lift heavy objects. They have all kinds of devices and robots to do these things. Joint Commission has actually joined into this, this movement. They are really concerned about patient safety. So they have recommendations now to utilize patient lifting equipment, no-lift policies, and specialized lifting teams. And they are recommending this in acute care hospitals, rehab hospitals, and skilled nursing facilities. The benefits to the patient would be that they're safer. They can ambulate quicker. There's fewer falls and improved outcomes. The employees, the staff, will have fewer injuries, and they'll be less fatigued. And the potential benefits for the healthcare organization, we've talked a little bit about that already, but the decreased workers' compensation, increased staff retention, and that's a huge cost to replace a nurse, takes about $60,000 to $80,000. And they have better patient satisfaction. So what do we have for industry guidelines today? As I said earlier, the AORN has been doing the same research to develop some algorithms for their 7 identified high-risk tasks. That is transferring a patient laterally from the OR table to a stretcher or vice versa, positioning a patient on the OR table or repositioning them, lifting and holding patients' limbs or other body parts for that matter, prolonged standing in one place, holding manual retraction, and one of the biggies, lifting supplies and equipment in the operating room. Pushing, pulling, and wheeling objects and equipment in and out of rooms. So those are the high-risk tasks that have been identified. So let's talk a little bit about each one. There's a lot of risk that you're going to sustain by reaching. Your posture is not straight. There's an increased load, especially when you are lifting and moving. The patient is dead weight. They're floppy. There's no handle. So it's really dangerous to do. If you're repositioning a patient, you're doing the same reaching, same lifting. We know you're not supposed to lift more than 35 pounds. It's really unstable because I don't know if the person next to me is going to get an injury. Are they going to hold up their part of this patient? So there's a possibility that the patient could fall. There's a possibility that if we don't lift the patient high enough when we're repositioning, they can get a shear injury on their skin. And then holding limbs. The ergonomics specialist, Tom Waters, helps with this and talks about the average nurse, and I'm going to tell you it's a 140-pound, 5'4" person. I'm not quite there, but getting there. Can lift with one hand 6 pounds. Can lift with 2 hands 11 pounds. But however, they can only hold those pounds for less than 3 minutes. Let's put this in perspective. You have a 150-pound patient. Their arm weighs 9.7 pounds. Their leg weighs almost 30 pounds. So already we are way over the limit for holding limbs. Standing for long periods of time. This is another high-risk task. People stand at an OR table for hours and hours doing cases, and we might leave and come back and do another case and stand for hours. There's a lot of hip, neck flexion going on, and every time you go from straight up with your spine to lean even 1 or 2 degrees, the load on your spine, on your vertebrae, are 3 times that. And these are repetitive actions. This is happening day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Holding manual traction. Constantly holding traction can injure your shoulders, your elbows, your wrists, your spine. And again, it's repetitive injuries over years. And this is just an example of lifting panics. There's also one of the high-risk tasks is lifting supplies and equipment. If you've ever been in an orthopedic total joint case, you know there's tray after tray after tray of heavy metal objects. These trays can weigh 25 or 30 pounds. Hopefully, in the future, they will weigh less. Irrigation fluid bags. So you know an IV bag has 1,000 cc's. The irrigation fluid bags that we use in the OR have 3,000 cc's, and they weigh 7.5 pounds. All right, remember, one hand, 6 pounds. So the bag of fluid itself, which we use 3 or 4 during a total an arthroscopy or one of those kind of cases. And again, repetitive nature. We need to have lifting higher than the waist level. So there's a lot of potential injuries going on. And we also know the last one is the reaching, lifting, and moving equipment. There's posture when you have to push and pull. And did you know that an RN pulls and lifts 1.8 tons in an 8-hour shift? There's not even those 12-hour shift people. So let's look at an economic case study. This study was presented, it was written up in Nursing Economics. Hunter described a decision to implement safe patient handling in her hospital. And they had to implement a no-lift practice. When they started, they looked back for the past couple of years and saw that they had 20 injuries of their staff per year on average. The direct cost for their institution was about $27,000 per claim. They estimated the indirect costs were between $54,000 and $84,000 per claim. So this is 3 times the direct cost. Their average spend per year was almost $550,000 in just direct costs. In 3 years, it was $1.5 million. So in 2005, when they were planning this whole turnover, getting the new technology, they had an additional $268,000 while they were planning this change. It takes time. And at the same time, Texas was beginning legislation to implement the safe patient and healthcare worker rules. So what Hunter found out was, in 2005, their direct spend was $300,000. After putting in the no-lift policies and practice and technology, in 2006, it was down to $24,000. In 2007, $1,600, 2008, $2,000, in 2009, $1,300. So you can see that the result of putting in this safe patient handling technology and no-lift practices and policies actually saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars. They also found a bunch of other benefits that they didn't expect. And one was that the nurses and the assistants were less fatigued. So once you've actually lifted patients back and forth on stretchers, getting them up, sitting them up, doing whatever you're doing, you're really tired at the end of the day. And once they put in these lifts and no-lift policies, they had more energy. They also had a decrease in their workmen's compensation rates for the entire hospital. They had fewer patient falls and injuries. Their morale was noticeably higher. Careers of their nurses and healthcare team were extended. And they saw a return on investment in less than 3 years. And this was their entire hospital. So they also found a real good growing culture of safety. So let's look at the OR. Here's a case study of an OR staff being injured. An RN was helping flip a spine patient from supine to prone, and the patient was anesthetized. She injured her back and was unable to complete the patient turn. There were direct costs, the ER, the workman's comp, and of course there was delayed payment for this nurse. The hospital also had to get a traveler nurse for the OR, which cost them $100 per hour. They had to guarantee that that person worked 40 hours, and that meant $4,000 for 13 weeks at a total of $52,000. And the 13 weeks is the 12 weeks that they're covering, the first week, which was orientation. So another RN actually had to step into this spine case when it was happening, and that resulted in increased burden. First of all for the staff, second of all for the RN, but it also resulted in 30 minutes extra time, overtime on this particular spine case. And they calculated their OR room cost at $83 per minute, and 30 minutes is already $2,490. The RN that stepped into the case, because it went longer, was being paid overtime for that last hour. And they also had to orient the new traveler for 1 week at a loss of $4,000 because they could not take their own load of patients. So there are a lot of costs associated with that. This particular hospital also had a union contract that would not let a per diem nurse go home if there was a traveler nurse present. The traveler nurse has to get paid anyway. So you can see that it's complex and the costs add up. It's not just cut and dry a direct cost. So how important are ergonomics for your facility? Tom Waters, who is a safety engineer, and he works for NEOSH, and he is a wonderful guy. But he's really clear in when he tells you that the goal of ergonomics is to design jobs and work tasks so they are safe for workers, but maintain productivity and efficiency. And this is really key in the OR because it's a timed, fast-paced place, and we need to have technology that works with that efficiency. So if you were going to do this, and a lot of you are probably on this call because you thought of it, you're in the middle of it, or you want to get some pointers. But actually, the U.S. Department of Labor has a great bunch of information on how to get hospitals started and work towards steps to get safe patient handling. The American Nurses Association has actually done a lot of work with a lot of other nursing associations, but has actually presented 13 different steps in order to start patient safe handling and continue it and maintain that change. And you can see a little picture here. This is just an anti-fatigue mat. You probably have one in front of your kitchen sink. This is one of the technologies available to us very cheaply to help with some high-risk tasks. So what are we really supposed to do? Well, we told you you're not supposed to lift over 35 pounds. You're not supposed to hold something for longer than 3 minutes. These are all the ergonomically, scientifically supported numbers. We also know that we don't want to lift more than 22 to 25 pounds. And I got these numbers because OR Manager quoted the sterile technology group saying 22 pounds and the AORN group saying 25. So we're supposed to be using mechanical devices to lift, transfer, turn, or reposition a patient. And this is just a picture of a ceiling lift. I've had a lot of conversations with different people who specialize in safe patient handling. And Tony Hilton is actually the leader of the Safe Patient Handling and Mobility National Program for the Veterans Administration. She's out in Loma Linda. And talking to her about how they're doing in the operating room, I'm just going to quote her. She said, even with our success, in the operating rooms are still the hardest to get to for many reasons. And we need to get there because they're responsible for 60% of this hospital's revenue. We need manufacturers to develop and trial technologies for the operating room. So as the leader in this arena, she's telling us that we really need to get this technology into operating rooms. She also talks specifically about the needs that are a little bit different for the operating room and other things that really make these lifting programs work. And one, for the OR, it has to be cleanable. It needs to be built in. There's very little real estate to wheel in one more piece of equipment. It has to be able to lift a heavy weight. And we're talking bariatric surgery with patients that can weigh up to 600 pounds. It needs to have sterilizable or a methodology for clean slings. It needs to come with an education program and an auditing system to see that it's still being utilized correctly. You have turnover, new staff, travelers. So an education program and an audit is key to any bringing technology into an operating room. There also needs to be a local champion. And this is talking about somebody in the operating room, in scrubs, every day that can champion this cause. And she basically said it should be in every new room design in the operating room. There are a lot of new designs that actually have another boom already allotted in some of the new ORs, just in case. So what are the barriers to the operating room? Well, the first and foremost is always those double doors. Nobody wants to go through the double doors. You got to change your clothes. People don't know you. You don't know where it's safe to go. So there is a big attitude, a collective attitude that is closed off from the real world, thankfully, in the OR. But the time is a real big barrier. ORs are really time-oriented places. A case takes this much time, turnover needs to take this much time. Space, again, we talked about that, wheeling another piece of equipment. And they have a very, very strong culture. So what technologies do we have now? What is out there? And one of the technologies, I'm going to show this to you. Look up in this top right-hand corner. This is a patient lifting device, mechanical lifting device, built into the OR boom. You don't have to run it in, run it out. So this particular device actually hits 5 of the 7 risk tasks for OR nursing. Transferring a patient laterally from the OR table to a stretcher, to position or reposition a patient on the table, to lift and hold the patient's limbs, even holding manual traction. And the other one I kind of highlighted in pink here is because you don't have to actually push or pull another wheeled object into the room. It's already built in. Sorry. And this is just an example of how you would utilize this to turn a patient over in the room. And what other technologies do we still have? Now we have these anti-fatigue mats that can be the entire OR floor. They can be washable, cleanable, disposable. So it's a real easy technology. It's been out there in our homes and in industry, and now it's available to the operating rooms. Lifting supplies and equipment in the OR. There's a lot of equipment now that comes with a motorized lifting. Gone are the pumps of the OR tables. There are also now devices that will power lift the IV pole, so you can actually put that 7-pound bag of fluid on there and it will be lifted up. Holding manual traction, self-retaining retractors, power lifting devices, wheeled lifting devices. These are all available to us now. talk about what is going to be the return on investment here. So it's going to take money to get these new technologies. And how do you know if it's even worth it for you? Well, here's a calculator. This is a return on investment calculator that I got from some friends of mine at Olympus. And they are able to let you put in numbers here to say how many staff are injured in a year. So say you say 2. And the next part of information is actual insurance information of how many claims have been made for healthcare workers and what that annual cost is. So if you see the percentage here and you think 2 injured staff, you're going to come out with a medical cost of about $17,700 some odd dollars. Then you're going to think about, well, what does that actually cost me at my hospital? How many of these people have missed days? How much is the average missed days? And for a little incident like a sore shoulder or a sore wrist, they may only miss a few days of work. For significant injuries, the days are going to be longer. You can put in what your average hourly staff salary is. And then one of the big things I want to really hammer home here is that if you had to replace that staff member, we know to replace a nurse in the OR is going to cost you from $50,000 to $100,000. And then what if you don't even have to replace that whole worker? What if you just had to replace it in an hourly basis with a traveler? It's going to be more expensive. So you can actually estimate what your cost of injuries is. You can also, now if we look at the other side, we can talk about how much you're going to save. So if you look at how many procedures you do per year, if you're going to add one of these boom lift systems, and say it costs $17,000, they're going to depreciate over 7 years. You're going to add the cost of a sling, whether it's sterilized or laundered, disposable, however you're going to do it, and then any additional costs that may not be known by other people, like restocking and things like that. You can also start thinking about your full-time equivalents. So when you have to call 6 people to lifting help in room 6, with a boom that's built into the OR, you can use 3 people. Normally there's an anesthesian, 1 on each side. If you're going to do hold a limb up, so this was 2 people already taken, now you only need 1. They can do the whole scrub and prep by themselves. So as you think about the savings, it's savings of personnel, not only their injury, but actually the real-time use in an operating room itself. So you can estimate this, and it appears to be about $11,000 savings. So you can do the math, utilize this, and find out if it's really going to be worthwhile for your group. So when I come to the end of this, I want to just reiterate that we talked about the physical pain, and I didn't really go into emotional pain, but if I had to give up my nursing practice because I injured my back, that would be significant. The increasing risk for staff as every year goes by, you have more and more repetitive, more and more injuries. And the increasing risk with patients, they're getting heavier. We talked about financial pain, the real cost, the direct cost, and all those sometimes transient indirect costs. And the point I think was the most important for me to make is that in the OR, if you lose that highly skilled person, they're not really easily replaced. You're going to not only replace that person with those costs, but you're going to have increased setup times, increased turnover times, longer case times. That person may be missing cues that the surgeon gives them because they don't do these cases all the time. They might make errors. And all of this leads to surgeon and staff frustration and eventually lower margins from your cases. We know preventing injuries really is the right thing to do. And we've had evidence that This really is a good return on investment within 1 to 3 years, depending on what you're going to put in, what your risk factors are, what your injuries are. And everybody's different, but we do know this is the wave of the future, and we have to start protecting our healthcare workers. Thank you very much. I'll take some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Patterson, for that fantastic presentation. We will now begin today's question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter Question for Staff and clicking Send. We will try to get through as many questions as we have time for. I see quite a few questions coming in here. We'll get started with this one. What recommendations do you have for putting patients in prone position while under anesthesia?
Thanks, Brian. That's a really good question. That is actually probably the hardest thing for us to do and the most risk, because especially spine patients, they are already anesthetized when we have to turn them over. So having lifting equipment and slings that can move them as well as turn them is key to preventing any further injuries to both the patient and the staff.
Great. That's helpful to understand. We've got another question here. What vendors would you recommend we contact to obtain more information about a boom integrated patient lift?
No, that's a good question, but I think the only people I know that have this so far is Olympus. I know that there are ceiling lift systems made by Goldman and Lyco and other people, but in the OR, in the boom, I have not seen any other.
Great, thanks for clarifying that. This audience member asks, I work for a VA facility and we must finalize a safe patient handling and mobility program by the end of the year. This product seems like it could be easily incorporated into such a program. How can I evaluate or get access to the patient lift?
So if you want more information, you can either email me or look for a Olympus rep in your area, maybe go online. I think that would be probably the best way to do it.
Great. Thanks for pointing that out. And it looks like that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Dr. Patterson for her excellent presentation and to our audience for participating today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.
Thanks, Brian.